First book of Maccabees, Crisis and Response, Chapter 1. From Alexander to Antiochus. After Alexander the Macedonian, Philip's son, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, he became king in his place, having first ruled in Greece. He fought many battles, captured fortresses, and put the kings of the earth to death. He advanced to the ends of the earth, gathering plunder from many nations. The earth fell silent before him, and his heart became proud and arrogant. He collected a very strong army and won dominion over provinces, nations, and rulers, and they paid him tribute. But after all this, he took to his bed, realizing that he was going to die. So he summoned his noblest officers, who had been brought up with him from his youth, and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. Alexander had reigned 12 years when he died. So his officers took over his kingdom, each in his own territory, and after his death they all put on diadems, and so did their sons after them for many years, multiplying evils on the earth. There sprang from these a sinful offshoot, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus Antiochus. Maybe Antiochus. Okay, so there sprang up from these a sinful offshoot, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus, once a hostage at Rome. He became king in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Lawless Jews. In those days there appeared in Israel transgressors of the law, who seduced many, saying, "Let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles all around us, since we separated from them. Many evils have come upon us." The proposal was agreeable. Some from among the people promptly went to the king, and he authorized them to introduce the ordinances of the Gentiles. Thereupon they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom. They disguised their circumcision and abandoned the holy covenant. They allied themselves with the Gentiles and sold themselves to wrongdoing. I don't ever want to do that. Antiochus in Egypt. When his kingdom seemed secure, Antiochus undertook to become king of the land of Egypt and to rule over both kingdoms. He invaded Egypt with a strong force, with chariots, elephants, and cavalry, and with a large fleet, to make war on Ptolemy, king of Egypt. Ptolemy was frightened at his presence and fled, and many were wounded and fell dead. The fortified cities in the land of Egypt were captured, and Antiochus plundered the land of Egypt. Robbery of the temple. After Antiochus had defeated Egypt in the 143rd year, he returned and went up against Israel and against Jerusalem. With a strong force, he insolently entered the sanctuary and took away the golden altar, the lampstand for the light with all its utensils, the offering table, the cups and bowls, the golden censers and the curtain, the cornices and the golden ornament on the facade of the temple. He stripped it all off, and he took away the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. He also took all the hidden treasures he could find. Taking all this, he went back to his own country. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. And there was great mourning throughout all of Israel, and the rulers and the elders groaned. Young women and men languished, and the beauty of the women faded. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, while the bride sitting in her chamber mourned. And the land quaked on account of its inhabitants, and all of the house of Jacob was clothed with shame, attack, and occupation. 2 years later, the king sent the Mysian commander to the Mysian commander to the cities of Judah, and he came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He spoke to them deceitfully in peaceful terms, and they believed him. Then he attacked the city suddenly in a great onslaught and destroyed many of the people in Israel. He plundered the city and set fire to it, demolished its houses and its surrounding walls, and they took captive the women and the children and seized the animals. Then they built up the city of David with a high, strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. There they installed a sinful race, transgressors of the law, who fortified themselves inside it. They stored up weapons and provisions, depositing there the plunder they had collected from Jerusalem, and they became a great snare. The citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary, and a wicked adversary to Israel at all times. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary. They defiled the sanctuary, because to them the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled away. She became the abode of strangers. She became a stranger to her own offspring, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary became desolate as a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, and her Sabbaths to shame. What are you doing? I love you. Her honor to contempt, as her glory had been so great, was her dishonor. Her exaltation was turned into mourning, religious persecution. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people and abandon their particular customs. All the Gentiles conformed to the command of the king, and many Israelites delighted in his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. The king sent letters by messenger to Jerusalem and to the cities of Judah, ordering them to follow customs foreign to their land, to prohibit burnt offerings, sacrifice, and libations in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and feast days, to desecrate the sanctuary and the sacred ministers, to build pagan altars and temples and shrines, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised, and to defile themselves with every kind of impurity and abomination, so that they might forget the law and change all its ordinances. Whoever refused to act according to the command of the king was to be put to death. In words such as these, he wrote to his whole kingdom. He appointed inspection over all the people, and he ordered the cities of Judah to offer sacrifices, each city in turn. Many of the people, those who abandoned the law, joined them and committed evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding whenever places of refuge could be found. On the 15th day of the month, Kislev, in the year 145, the king erected the desolating abomination upon the altar of burnt offerings. And in the surrounding cities of Judah, they built pagan altars. They also burned incense at the doors of the houses and in the streets, and scrolls of the law, and they tore up and burned. Whoever was found with the scroll of the covenant and whoever observed the law was condemned to death by royal decree. So they used their power against Israel, against those who were caught each month in cities. On the 25th day of each month they sacrificed on the pagan altar that was over the altar of burnt offerings. In keeping with the decree, they put to death women. I'll find my spot again. These dogs. Oh, honey. I know I love you. I love you. I'm reading the Bible, though. I'm reading the Bible right now. You can listen. You gonna listen? Yeah, you listen to me, okay? You can listen to me read the Bible. Many of the people who abandoned the law joined them and committed evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding wherever places of refuge could be found. On the 15th day of the month Kislev, in the year 145, the king erected the desolating abomination upon the altar of burnt offerings, and in the surrounding cities of Judah they built pagan altars. They also burned incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. Any scrolls of the law that they found, they tore up and burned. Whoever was found with the scroll of the covenant and whoever observed the law was condemned to death by royal decree. So they used their power against Israel, against those who were caught each month in the cities. On the 25th day of each month they sacrificed on the pagan altar that was over the altar of burnt offerings, in keeping with the decree. They put to death women who had their children circumcised, and they hung their babies from their necks. Their families also, and those who had circumcised them, were killed. But many in Israel were determined and resolved in their hearts not to eat anything unclean. They preferred to die rather than to be defiled with food or to profane the holy covenant. And they did die, and very great wrath came upon Israel. First Maccabees Chapter 2. Mattathias and his sons. In those days, Mattathias, son of John, son of Simeon, a priest of the family of Jehoiarib, left Jerusalem and settled in Modian. He and 5 sons, John, who was called Gadi, Simon, who was called Thesai, Judas, who was called Maccabeus, Eleazar, who was called Avaran, and Jonathan, who was called Apphus. When he saw the sacrileges that were being committed in Judah and in Jerusalem, he said, "Woe is to me! Why was I born? To see the ruin of my people, the ruin of the holy city, to dwell there. As it was given into the hands of the enemies, the sanctuary into the hands of strangers. Her temple has become like a man disgraced. Her glorious vessels carried off as spoils, her infants murdered in her streets. Her youths by the sword of the enemy. What nation has not taken its share of her realm and laid its hand on her spoils? All her adornment has been taken away. Once free, she has become a slave. We see our sanctuary laid waste, our beauty, our glory. The Gentiles have defiled them. Why are we still alive?" Then Mattathias and his sons tore their garments, put on sackcloth, and mourned bitterly. Pagan worship refused and resisted. The officers of the king in charge of enforcing the apostasy came to the city of Modian to make them sacrifice. Many of Israel joined them, but Mattathias and his sons drew together. Then the officers of the king addressed Mattathias, "You are a leader, an honorable and great man in the city, supported by sons and kindred. Come now, be the first to obey the king's command." And all of the Gentiles, Judeans, and those who are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons shall be numbered among the king's friends, and you and your sons shall be honored in silver and gold and many gifts. But Mattathias answered in a loud voice, "Although all of the Gentiles in the king's realm obey him, so that they forsake the religion of their ancestors and consent to the king's orders, yet I and my sons and my kindred will keep to the covenant of our ancestors. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the commandments. We will not obey the words of the king by departing from our religion in the slightest degree." As he finished saying these words, a certain Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modian, according to the king's order. When Matthias saw him, he was filled with zeal, his heart was moved, and his just fury was aroused. He sprang forward and killed him upon the altar. At the same time, he also killed the messenger of the king, who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he showed his zeal for the law, just as Phinehas did with Zimri. Then Mattathias cried out in the city, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and who stands by the covenant follow me." Then he and his sons fled to the mountains, leaving behind in the city all of their possessions. At that time, many who sought righteousness and justice went out into the wilderness to settle there, they and their children, their wives, and their animals, because misfortunes pressed so hard on them. It was reported to the officers and soldiers of the king who were in the city of David in Jerusalem that those who had flouted the king's order had gone out to secret refuges in the wilderness. Many hurried out after them, and having caught up with them, camped opposite and prepared to attack them on the Sabbath. The pursuers said to them, "Enough of this. Come out and obey the king's command, and you will live." But they replied, "We will not come out, nor will we obey the king's command to profane the Sabbath." Then the enemy attacked them at once, but they did not retaliate. They neither threw stones nor blocked up their secret refuges. They said, "Let us all die in innocence. Heaven and earth are our witnesses that you destroy us unjustly." So the officers and soldiers attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died with their wives, their children, and their animals, to the number of 1,000 persons. When Mattathias and his friends heard of it, they mourned deeply for them. They said to one another, "If we all do as our kindred have done, and do not fight against the Gentiles for our lives and our laws, they will soon destroy us from the earth." So on that day they came to this decision: Let us fight against anyone who attacks us on the Sabbath, so that we may not all die as our kindred died in their secret refuges. Then they were joined by a group of Hasidians, mighty warriors of Israel, all of them devoted to the law, and all of those who were fleeing from the persecutions joined them and supported them. They gathered an army and struck down sinners in their wrath, and the lawless in their anger, and the survivors fled to the Gentiles for safety. Mattathias and his friends went about and tore down the pagan altars. They also forcibly circumcised any uncircumcised boys whom they found in the territory of Israel. They put to flight the arrogant, and the work prospered in their hands. They saved the law from the hands of the Gentiles and of the kings, and did not let the sinner triumph. Farewell of Mattathias. When the time came for Mattathias to die, he said to his sons, "Arrogance and scorn have now grown strong. It is a time of disaster and violent wrath. Therefore, my children, be zealous for the law, and give your lives for the covenant of our ancestors. Remember the deeds that our ancestors did in their times, and you shall win great honor and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in trial, and it was credited to him as righteousness? Joseph, when in distress, kept the commandment, and he became master of Egypt. Phinehas, our ancestor, for his burning zeal, received the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Joshua, for executing his commission, became a judge in Israel. Caleb, for bearing witness before the assembly, received an inheritance in the land. David, for his loyalty, received as a heritage a throne of eternal kinship. Elijah, for his burning zeal for the law, was taken up to heaven. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, for their faith, were saved from the fire. Daniel, for his innocence, was delivered from the mouths of lions. And so consider this, from generation to generation, that none who hope in heaven shall fail in strength. Do not fear the words of sinners, for their glory ends in corruption and worms. Today exalted, tomorrow not to be found, they have returned to dust. Their schemes have perished. Children, be courageous and strong in keeping the law, for by it you shall be honored. Here is your brother Simeon, who I know is a wise counselor. Listen to him always, and he will be a father to you. And Judas Maccabeus, a mighty warrior from his youth, shall be the leader of your army and wage the war against the nations. Gather about you all who observe the law and avenge your people. Pay back to Gentiles what they deserve and observe the precedents of the law." Then he blessed them, and he was gathered to his ancestors. He died in the year 146 and was buried in the tombs of his ancestors in Modian, and all of Israel mourned him greatly. 2. Leadership of Judas Maccabeus. Chapter 3. Judas and his early victories. Then his son Judas, who was called Maccabeus, took his place. All his brothers and all who had joined his father supported him, and they gladly carried on Israel's way. He spread abroad the glory of his people and put on his breastplate like a giant. He armed himself with weapons of war. He fought battles and protected the camp with his sword. In his deeds he was like a lion, like a young lion roaring for prey. He pursued the lawless, hunting them out, and those who troubled his people he destroyed by fire. The lawless were cowed by fear of him, and all evildoers were dismayed. By his hand deliverance was happily achieved, and he afflicted many kings. He gave joy to Jacob by his deeds, and his memory is blessed forever. He went about the cities of Judah, destroying the renegades there. He turned away wrath from Israel, was renowned to the ends of the earth, and gathered together those who were perishing. That's a lot of kisses, Jen. That's a lot of kisses, Genesis. I love you. Okay. Then Apollonius gathered together the Gentiles along with a large army from Samaria to fight against Israel. When Judas learned of it, he went out to meet him and struck and killed him. Many fell wounded and the rest fled. They took their spoils, and Judas took the sword of Apollonius and fought with it the rest of his life. But Saron, commander of the Syrian army, heard that Judas had mustered an assembly of faithful men ready for war. So he said, "I will make a name for myself and win honor in the kingdom. I will wage war against Judas and his followers who have despised the king's command." And again, a large company of renegades advanced with him to help him take revenge on the Israelites. When he reached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a few men, but when they saw the army coming against them, they said to Judah, hold on, what, honey? Jen, I'm reading the Bible. You like it? You like the story? Yeah, you like it? Okay, that's what's going on. How can we, few as we are, fight such a strong host as this? Besides, we are weak, since we have not eaten today. But Judas said, many are easily hemmed in by a few. In the sight of heaven, there is no difference between deliverance by many or by few. For victory in war does not depend upon the size of the army, but on strength that comes from heaven. With great presumption and lawlessness, they come against us to destroy us and our wives and children and to despoil us. But we are fighting for our lives and our laws. We will crush them before us, so do not fear them. When he finished speaking, he rushed suddenly upon Saron and his army, who were crushed before him. He pursued Saron down the descent of Beth-horon into the plain. About 800 of their men fell, and the rest fled to the land of the Philistines. Then Judas and his brothers began to be feared, and dread fell upon the Gentiles about them. His fame reached the king, and the Gentiles talked about the battles of Judas. The king's strategy. When King Antiochus heard these reports, he was filled with rage, so he ordered that all of the forces of his kingdom be gathered, a very strong army. He opened his treasury, gave his soldiers a year's pay, and commanded them to be prepared for anything. But then he saw this exhausted the money in his treasury. Moreover, the tribute from the province was small because of the dissension and distress he had brought upon the land by abolishing the laws which had been in effect from of old. He feared that, as had happened once or twice, he would not have enough for his expenses and for the gifts he was accustomed to give with a lavish hand, more so than all previous kings. Greatly perplexed, he decided to go to Persia and levy tribute on those provinces, and so raise a large sum of money. He left Lysias, a noble of royal descent, in charge of the king's affairs from the Euphrates River to the frontier of Egypt, and commissioned him to take care of his son Antiochus. Until his return, he entrusted to him half of his forces and the elephants, and gave instructions concerning everything he wanted done. As for the inhabitants of Judea and Jerusalem, Lysias was to send an army against them to crush and destroy the power of Israel, and the remnant of Jerusalem, and efface their memory from the place. He was to settle foreigners in. You got Con? Is that your baby Con? You do. Hi, Samantha Panther. He was to settle for foreigners in all their territory and distribute their land by a lot. The king took the remaining half of the army and set out from Antioch, his capital, in the year 147. He crossed the Euphrates River and went through the provinces behind, preparations for battle. Lysias chose Ptolemy, son of Dormenes, and Nicanor and Gorgias, powerful men among the king's friends, and with them he sent 40,000 foot soldiers and 7,000 cavalry to invade the land of Judah according to the king's orders. Setting out with their whole force, they came and pitched their camp near Emmaus in the plain. When the merchants of the region heard of their prowess, they came to the camp bringing a huge sum of silver and gold, along with fetters, to buy the Israelites as slaves. A force from Edom and from Philistia joined with them. Judas and his brothers saw that evils had multiplied, and that the armies were encamped within their territory. They learned of the orders which the king had given to destroy and utterly wipe out the people. So they said to one another, let us raise our people from their ruin and fight for them and for our sanctuary. The assembly gathered together to prepare for battle and to pray and to ask for mercy and compassion. Jerusalem was uninhabited like a wilderness. Not one of her children came in or went out. The sanctuary was trampled on, and foreigners were in the citadel. It was a habitation for Gentiles. Joy had disappeared from Jacob, and the flute and the harp were silent. Thus they assembled and went to Mizpah, near Jerusalem, because formerly at Mizpah there was a place of prayer for Israel. That day they fasted and wore sackcloth. They sprinkled ashes on their heads and tore their garments. They unrolled the scroll of the law to learn about the times for which the Gentiles consulted the images of their idols. They brought with them the priestly garments, the firstfruits, and the tithes. And they brought forward the Nazarites who had completed the time of their vows. And they carried aloud to heaven, "What shall we do with these, and where shall we take them? For your sanctuary has been trampled on and profaned, and your priests are in mourning and humbled. Now the Gentiles are gathered together against us to destroy us. You know what they plot against us. How shall we be able to resist them unless you help us?" Then they blew the trumpets and cried out loudly. After this, Judas appointed officers for the people, over thousands, over hundreds, and over fifties, and over tens. He proclaimed to those who were building houses, or were just married, or just planting vineyards, and those who were afraid could each return home according to the law. Then the army moved off, and they camped to the south of Emmaus. Judas said, "Arm yourselves and be brave. In the morning be ready to fight these Gentiles who have assembled against us to destroy us in our sanctuary. It is better for us to die in battle than to witness the evils befalling our nation and our sanctuary. Whatever is willed in the heaven will be done." The word of the Lord. My hair keeps getting in my face. Thanks be to God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. What are you guys doing? Jen, what are you doing? Genesis, come here. Come here. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing, girl? So excited, huh? Sammy. Sammy. Samuel. Hi, honey. Okay, good. Okay, look. All right. God bless you.